Okay, hi everyone. Hi Ben,
Hi, Menachem.
how are you?
Good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Excellent.
Now, I saw Mervyn a moment ago. Now, who? Oh, there's Sandy. I don't know if Sandy can hear us.
It doesn't look like it.
No. And Cheryl, hi Cheryl. I'm going to turn on my camera, one sec. There we are.
Hi, Menachem. Hi, everybody.
You're well?
Hi.
I'm good, thank you. You?
That's good. That's good.
And how are you bearing up? Nobody asks you.
How I'm doing?
Yes.
Whatever the step below okay is, I'm calling that fair.
Okay.
I'm fair. It's my head's being a bit chopped off. There we are. Yeah, I'm fair. It's it's just, you know, bit frazzling is how I would best describe it.
Yeah.
But you know, I'm just sending them.
Sandy, your sound's off.
Oh no, you're good now. We can hear you,
Hello,
Sandy.
hello.
Hi,
hello.
Sandy. That's better. So Sherry asked how I am. It's frazzling. It's frazzling times. So for some that becomes very exciting. For others, it becomes very frazzling. And so for me, it has been a frazzling week and a half. But I would say that this week has been better than last week. I think just acclimatizing and adjusting is one part of the process, and that only time can do. And then there is finding one's feet is the other thing that we have to do, and that doesn't just happen. But then there's the acceptance that it is frazzling. It's hard to not go outside, and in our case with the kids at home, it definitely becomes all the more challenging. And I imagine it's the exact same and opposite challenge for those who don't have any children at home. It's like awfully quiet and restrictive, and you're left with the voices in your
Grandma
head.
duties.
Pardon?
Grandma duties.
Yeah, grandma duties.
Well,
Without grandma duties, what
I
are
have
we?
to take out the children to school, pick them up. Some children go to school, some children stay at home.
That's
What
right.
can Judy do?
Yeah, that's
You
it.
can split in half.
That's it.
Very difficult.
Then we've got g'day Melanie. How are you? Well, Melanie is present, but she hasn't connected to the sound, so she may not be able to answer, but it's good to see you. Anyway, we're going to begin. I'm going to take the opportunity to mute everyone. And I'm going to begin. So this week's Parsha is Parshas Re'eh. And this is the fourth Parsha in the book of Devarim. And just to remind that Devarim is Moshe's swan song. It is his monologue to the people, where he's recounting, he's sharing some new ideas amongst memories and stories that he wants to remind the people of. He's revising a number of the laws that are found in the Torah that have been part of their experience journeying through the desert, and is giving them a piece of his mind. And the whole Devarim is something that only goes over a period of weeks. It's not, although we read it over 1/5 of the year, but the timeline in which the book of Devarim was recited by or shared by Moshe this is the last part of his life. The Jews are about to have a leadership transition from Moshe to Joshua. And they're also going to have a transition of going from the desert into Israel. And so Parshas Re'eh continues on. It's like everything picks up from where we left off last. It's like this monologue that's been chopped up into 10 or so, a little more than that, sections. So in this week's parasha, there's so many, you see, to Devarim, the book of Devarim has so much action, so many interesting laws, so many stories. I can tell you as a teacher, there's no better, I would say maybe Genesis. Genesis is pretty awesome, but Genesis, Bereshit, doesn't have laws. Bereshit it's law, Lore, as opposed to the rest of the Torah, which has Law, law. And so the whole of Devarim has not only stories, but it also has laws, and that makes for such interesting fodder for what is it that we should learn about and talk about. So I chose in this week's parasha 3 subjects, and I'm just looking down at my notes. And the first is the concept of charity. Now, this concept of charity pops up in the parasha a few times. If I go, we've got the laws of Maaser, of giving 10% of your earnings of the crops of the field, etc. So if you've got a Chumash, which I know Ben definitely does, because so if you look at the beginning of the 5th reading, we've got Aser to Aser, which is the second tithe, which had to be taken. But we've also got in that same section, if you look at chapter 14, so much of chapter 14 actually, much of the second half of chapter 14 deals with charity. The first half talks about kosher, non-kosher, but from verse 22 all the way through to 29, we've got different forms of charity and distribution to the poor. And so I thought what would be a very interesting topic to explore is this idea of giving charity, and particularly the giving of charity in tough times. So we are very much in a tough time right now. We are experiencing economic hardship and insecurity like has not been experienced for a long time. This isn't a credit crunch. This isn't a bubble that has burst, because what's happened here is literally overnight. In a matter of a few months, there has been devastating impacts on all forms of industry, on all forms of expenditure, in that people can't even go to shops. So you might have money, but you haven't got the place to spend it necessarily. And so that impacts the small retailers. You might have raw material, but you don't have the ability to run your factories, or you don't have the transportation lines. Then what we've got is mass unemployment, financial insecurity, which means a decrease in spending. And so within a matter of months, we haven't just got a financial downturn on our hands, but we've got a global financial downturn. It's in situations like that that the conversation around charity becomes a very, very interesting one. There's a very obvious conversation of charity, which is, people need money right now, times are tough, we have to give charity. But then there is the much equally important conversation, which is, I don't know if I can afford to give charity right now, or who do I give charity to? How much charity do I give? What form do I have to give charity? Can I just give of time? Can I just give of objects? Do I have to give cash? Which cause is the most important cause? And what if I'm running a bit low myself? Can I give myself charity? These are very, very interesting and complex questions that are very, very real and current right now in people's lives. And I thought we should explore this, especially in context of this week's parasha. So I want to first start off by saying there are many forms of charity, and there are many sections of the laws of charity, because there is giving charity to a poor person because they asked for money. Then there is the giving of charity because you have an obligation to give charity. And those two are not the same. A person asking for money does not necessarily mean you have to give. And the absence of anyone to receive your money does not mean you lack the obligation to give. So by splitting it up, we can really separate this idea of charity is for the poor. Part of charity is about giving, and part of charity is about where it goes. And those are part of this big word charity, but it doesn't mean that charity requires both of them. So let's first talk about this idea of 10%, because 10% is different to supporting the poor. Supporting the poor, as I said, is one thing, and giving 10% is another. So number one, Maisa. Maisa is 10. Eser is the number 10. And there is a biblical obligation that one has to give 10% of their earnings to charity. And it's very specific. That would go to the Kohanim, would go to the priests, it would go to distribution amongst community. This was separate to temple upkeep. So there was the half shekel contribution, which everyone made every year. This already started in the desert period, and it continued in once the Jews got to Israel, and all the way into the Second Temple period and beyond. And while it served a couple interesting purposes, one was that it helped take a census. By if everyone gave a half shekel and no one was allowed to give more or less, then you just count how many shekels you have divided by 2. You know how many people there are, because it was this mandatory payment. And that money would be used primarily to Beit HaKabayis. It would go towards the temple's upkeep in Jerusalem, or anything that the temple felt was required in association with the temple, whether it was sacrifices or other things. The temple was a very interesting place, and it had its expenses, and sometimes there were surpluses, and sometimes there were massive deficits. There could be financial mismanagement due to just lack of financial prowess. At different times of history, the temple treasuries were raided. Rome used to frequently empty the temple treasury, so they literally just took the cash. But that's not what Maisa is. Maisa is that 10% of your income must be given away. Now, it doesn't matter how you get your income. If your income is money, so 10% of that money needs to be given away. If your income is carrots, then 10% of your crop has to be given away. If your income is sheep's wool, then 10% of that has to be given away. It can be converted into a dollar value and the money's given away, or you can give away the actual produce. The thing is that 10% has to be given. The question is, how do we calculate the 10%? Especially in a modern world where there's tax. So what's interesting is that taxes in different countries work in different ways. The two fundamental ideas, and Australia and America differ in this way, which is interesting. One idea is that the money belongs to the government. For some reason, it has been deposited into your bank account, but it belongs to the government and you have to hand it over. The other attitude is it's your money and the government wants you to pay for things, and therefore it charges the tax. Now, where this becomes very, very important is income tax. Is income tax a tax on your money, or is income tax that when you have completed a certain amount of work, there is a profit that has been generated of which you get X and Y has to be given to the government? Now, practically speaking, it doesn't make a difference. You got to pay your taxes. Where the subtlety becomes important is, what do you have to give 10% on? If all the money is yours, then you, just because maths sometimes is not my strongest point, so I'm just going to use whole figures like $100,000. Let's say you earn $100,000. If every last penny, if every last cent of that $100,000 is yours, then $10,000 has to be given to charity, and then you give money to tax. If the money actually belongs to the government, it was never yours. So it's just in your head, you earn $100,000, but actually you're being paid $90,000 and the government makes 10 grand off your work. Well, then you have to give Maisa on 90,000. The way it works in Australia and in a number of countries is that income tax is not yours. It is not yours to pocket and then give to the government. It belongs to the government. You are not allowed to take that money. You're not allowed to spend that money. It is illegal. Yes, I know we do tax returns and the maths is only done after I've earned my money, but the attitude is that that money does not belong to us, it belongs to the government. In which case, Maisa, giving 10% of our income, is only after we have paid income tax. Now, then there are further discussions about whether other taxes or expenses come into it. And that's where it depends on one's socioeconomic tax bracket, so to speak, or the socioeconomic place on that spectrum. If a person is extremely short of funds, where they earn, let's say, 40 grand a year, but they've got a family, they've got a house, so 40 grand a year is not going to be very much. So you got to pay for food, you got to pay for electricity, you got to pay for water. There's some essentials. So if a person can't afford it, they actually still have to give 10%. The question is whether every last cent of what they're earning is required for the basic necessities of life or not. And there'll be sometimes leniencies that if every last cent is required for the basic necessities, you only give 10% on what is left behind. And then if that's not the case, then you give 10% and then you spend the money on yourself. So it really depends where you are on the spectrum as to when that 10% kicks in. And halachically, there are different systems for determining for each individual when they should give their 10%. Further, there are other things like Jewish education. So Jewish education is something that we must give our children. We have an obligation to give our children a Jewish education. This is age old. In fact, I'm just learning a section of Rambam of Maimonides, and he codifies this as law. Now, what happens if Jewish education is very expensive? So the Code of Jewish Law already recodifies 400 years ago that paying for your child's education can come out of your 10% of charity that you have to give. Because it is such an important mitzvah, you can use that money in order to provide your child with a Jewish education. Now, why that becomes a very important and interesting fact is because we live in a city where Jewish education is quite expensive if you choose to send your children to most of the Jewish day schools. While there are bursary systems at different schools, and some are more liberal in how they distribute it than others, and there is definitely one school that takes the attitude that every child deserves a Jewish education, and therefore they will do whatever they can to ensure that that child can go to the school, even if it means paying virtually nothing. But other schools are not necessarily, that's not necessarily their philosophy, and that's fine. Everyone can make their own decisions what their philosophy is. But why this is very important is because if I have a Torah obligation to give 10% to charity, and I'm finding that all the expenses of life are piling up, and I don't want to send my child to a Jewish school because it's just too expensive, then halacha would say, whoa. Are you giving 10% to charity? Yes, I am. And are you finding that you're short of money in order to send them to a Jewish day school? Yes, I am. Then halacha would say, then take your 10% and pay for your child's Jewish education. So that is a very interesting interplay on charity. So what's interesting is that if we go back to verse 22 and we explore, not only do we have to give Maisa, not only do we have to give 10%, but if you keep reading into chapter 15 and onwards, even if you receive money, so let's say you're a Cohen, Cohenim didn't have an income stream, or Levium didn't have a proper income stream, they relied on the contributions of the community, they have to still give 10% to charity. So being on the receiving end of charity does not absolve a person from having to give 10% of their earnings. So the Torah doesn't say, how did you get the money? The Torah is saying, you've received money, give charity. There's the discussion as to whether you're taxed, etc., and therefore that comes into play. But as long as you're receiving money, 10% has to go to charity. That is the biblical mandate that comes up in this week's parasha. So what I've explained is when does tax kick in, and are there any exceptions to how you can use that money on yourself? And there are other mitzvahs that you can actually put that 10% of charity to, but it's got to be essential that you can't afford and you need to do that mitzvah. So you can't just be like, well, it's a mitzvah to do this, so I'm going to spend the money on that. It's mitzvahs like that, that if you don't do, you're going to be seriously hampered. So like kosher meat. If you can't afford kosher meat, then you're not going to be eating any meat. It's not a luxury to eat food. If you're buying large quantities, that's a luxury. But the basic need to eat is not a luxury. So to buy kosher, one might be able to dip into their Mesa money. For Jewish education, one can dip into the Mesa money. But one can't say, oh, I think it's a really good thing to it's an important law to build a fence around your flat roof. So I'm going to use my Mesa money to build a fence around the roof, which there is such a law. If you have a flat roof that's accessible to the public or even accessible to anyone, you have to build a fence around it. So we would say halachically, no. You don't build a fence. You seal the doorway. When you've got extra money, you build the fence. So you can't use that money to then go and do other mitzvahs if those mitzvahs aren't required of you at this time. Like I don't have a flat roof, so I don't have the mitzvah to build a fence around my roof. I can't now say, I'm going to use the Mesa money to buy a house which has a flat roof so I can build a balcony around it. So you can only use the Mesa money on yourself if it's covering an intrinsic part of your life that you must do. And if you don't have the money, you can't do it. And then you're going to be lead to offending the mitzvah. Then you can dip into the Mesa money. Where does that Mesa money go? That Mesa money can go nowadays, it can go anywhere. You can give it to any cause. And there's a clear hierarchy as to which causes are important. Now, before, I haven't even got to if someone asks for money. So the hierarchy of charity is very, very clear. Aniyeh ircha kodmin. You must always give to the poor people in your town ahead of any other poor people. And more specifically, Jewish poor people. So we are commanded as a tribe, as a people, that we have to look after our own before we start looking after others. This is a very, very contentious matter because many people like to give to other causes when there are very many causes within our very own people that need to be dealt with. So as long as there is hunger in the Jewish community in Melbourne, as long as there is homelessness or abuse or mental health issues in the Jewish community, I see a serious problem with giving money outside of the Jewish community. That's just my 2 cents on that. Now, after that, there is giving locally, and then there is giving to the poor people of Israel, and you have this hierarchy. And it's very much about human needs. Now, giving to beyond the Jewish community is also actually very high up because it becomes very problematic when you live in a broader society, which is made up of many different cultures and religions. When there is money in the community and you say, oh no, we only give to our own. That's the sort of attitude that can actually give rise to anti-Semitism. It can lead to adverse impacts on the community. And therefore one has to be mindful of the society in which we live. And not only do we have to be mindful of it, at the end of the day, we always have to live with the attitude that anyone in need is a creature of Hashem. Everyone is a creature of Hashem. Everyone is a creation of Hashem. So I have to be compassionate for all creatures, all of humanity. I have to be compassionate. The question is, the legal question is, if I only have so much money and I have competing interests, then where should I give first? But if I have heaps of money, then there are no competing interests and I can give to multiple causes at the same time. But if a person is saying, I have $1,000 to give away, that's what my Mesa dictates. I have $1,000 to give away. Where should I give it? Our personal attitude should be, let's start at home and then let's start moving in concentric circles beyond. And of course, the bare necessities of life are the number one things to be supporting in charity. Now, that's where we have to give our money. Sadly, we live in a world where no one can say, I've got 10% to give, but I've got nothing to give it to. Like everyone's just fine. Sadly, we live in a world where there are plenty of needs and causes to give to. Now, Hashem created the world like this. Hashem's created a world where there is constant flux and flow. There is up and down. There's good and bad. There is need and and excess. That's how it is. The challenge, the avodah for the individual, the avodah on the person, is not to say, well, God made you poor, that's your issue. I don't want to mix in with God's plan. Hashem gave us money in order to give part of it away and to hold on to part of it for ourselves. That is the human need, and Hashem designed us like that. When we give money away, we're giving a part of ourselves away. That hard-earned money, however you got the money, whether you went to work or you inherited it, it's yours. And Hashem says, I'm going to make you feel like it's yours. Really, it's mine, by the way. I'm going to make you feel like it's yours, so it's your challenge to give it away. Because when you give it away, then you are being mesaken, you're improving and you're fixing and you're changing your very own dynamic. You are by nature, we are all by nature self-centered. When we start giving charity, we start refining ourselves to becoming other-centered, which means that there is a creature in this world that is by nature self-centered. Hashem created the self-centered creature, and that creature willingly evolves itself. That is part of what existing in this world is about evolving the negative or the neutral parts of the world and making them good. So of course Hashem could have made a world which is filled with abundance, but then negative wouldn't become better. The whole point of having negative in this world is that negative can be refined into positive. And so we can refine character traits, and charity is the hardest thing, because this is my money. This is my trip to Europe. This is my ice cream. This is my daily coffee. This is mine. And I'm giving it to you. That is an incredible thing. Now imagine every fortnight or every month, you receive a paycheck. You go, right, that 10% to charity. That's an incredible thing. But also think about if everyone did that. What would society look like if 10% of Australia, if 100% of Australia gave 10% of their earnings to charity? We would have a very different looking social welfare system. We would have a very different attitude towards government's role in community. I think it would be incredible. Just add up the money and work out what the distributions are like. I haven't done it, but it would be a very different country. It would be a very different world. 10% is not a lot of money, but it is a lot of money. And it all adds up. So if you think about it, a person who's earning 100 grand a year, that's 10 grand going to, now I can tell you, because I fundraise, when I get $10,000 from someone, that is massive. That is a massive donation to our work. Massive. Now, and everyone would say $10,000 is a massive donation. And generally, if you say, oh, I got a $10,000 donation from someone, by default, you go, wow, that person's obviously very comfortable, very well-to-do, very wealthy. They've given a very nice donation. But then when you say $100,000 in Australia is Baruch Hashem, it's a good salary, but by no means would anyone say someone that earns $100,000 is up there in the upper 10% of financial earners in this country. I mean, the tax system doesn't even deem someone that earns $100,000 that much. And yet a $10,000 donation, everyone is going to say is an incredible donation, which just goes to show how your average Joe Blow like me can make such a massive impact if I just gave 10% to charity. I want to go a step further, which is a lot of the teachings in the Gemara, which is that because Hashem says the money is really mine, when you give 10%, you're not going to lose any money. This is a belief thing. This is very hard. This is like, what are you talking about? I'm losing it. I'm talking about from a spiritual, religious point of view, a philosophical position is if I don't look at the money as mine, it's Hashem's. I'm merely the custodian to determine to whom this money goes, but it is not my money. The Gemara says you will never be short a penny because you gave charity. If you're short a penny, it's because you're short a penny. But you will never be short because you gave charity. Now, there are other laws around charity. You're not allowed to give more than a fifth of your income to charity. Conditions apply. There are exceptions to that. But generally, Maimonides says it's foolish and wrong to give more than a fifth. So imagine you earn $100,000, again, coming back to my round figure, even go further. Let's go crazy. Imagine you have $10 million in earnings. So that means 1/5 is $2 million. You're not allowed to give, according to Rambam, you're not allowed to give more than $2 million. It means you have to pocket $8 million. Imagine the tragedy of having to pocket $8 million. You want to give more, but Rambam says you're not allowed. So not Rambam, the Torah says you can't give more than a chomesh. Now, what the Gemara and Rambam and the poskim, the halachic authorities explain, is that once you cross a certain threshold, you can give more than a fifth. But just think about that on $100,000. $20,000 is the max that you can give. After that, you must make sure every other aspect of your life is looked after, and you're not allowed to give more right now. So imagine a tax system where the highest taxable income on 95% of the country was 20%. It's a very interesting number, and yet the Torah seems to be of the opinion that if everyone is on anywhere between a 10 and 20% taxable rate on their income, society is going to be fine. I haven't done the numbers, but I'd love someone to do the numbers on that. But now the Torah does not deter. Now, why do I bring that up? Because I said that the Levim and the Kohanim had to give charity, they had to give 10% on their earnings, even though they were completely dependent on the generosity of the community. So what we see is that there is never an exception as to when we give 10%. No matter how difficult times are, we must give 10%. Not only must we give 10%, but actually, when times are tough, in a way, the challenge that I raised is even greater because every dollar is important. And now, in a time of shortage, you're saying, and I still have to give 10%, that's really hard. That is the deep refinement. That is the incredible nature of the mitzvah of charity, of Maisa, particularly when you're giving when times are tough. That is where the magic takes place in this world. I said that the other side of tzedakah when I started this discussion is giving to the poor. So the first half is you have to give. The second half is giving to the poor. When someone asks you for money, you can give them from your 10%. So before we moved to where we live now, we lived on Sidwell Avenue in East St Kilda. And every night, almost every night, when travel was allowed, we'd have people knocking on our door collecting money for all sorts of causes. So what Rachel and I would do was some of the money that we had to give to Maisa, we'd just put in cash, we'd have an envelope and we'd give it out because people knocked on the door. You can use that 10% how you want. But if you have given 10% already to tzedakah and someone poor says, I need money, often you have to go further and give them money. You don't have to give them what they're asking for, but when someone sticks out their hand, we have a general value to put something in their hand. Now, it may be that you put in their hand food, and maybe you put money, and maybe you give them a job. Maisa is you have to give 10% of your earnings. Charity does not mean you have to give money. In fact, Rambam makes it very clear that sometimes to give a job is much more important than giving money. So charity to the poor is different from the giving of Maisa. You can't say, I'm not giving Maisa, instead I'm employing someone. No. If you've got money, you have to give it away. But if someone needs money, you can be resourceful in how you give and how you share. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to put a gold coin or a plastic note or a check or a credit card in their hand. Those are two separate things. Before we move to the next subject, are there any questions or comments on this, what I believe is actually a very interesting idea? So let me just see. Doron says, according to halacha, aren't we supposed to prioritize family members above everybody, not counting dependents? The answer is yes. There is family first, and there are the local and there is local needs first. The local needs of our brothers and sisters, Jewish people. Then there are the Jewish people of Israel. There is the broader society in which we live locally. And when we talk about local needs, it's not just, it's quite an extensive list of things. So of course, immediate shortage of food, shelter, the basic things that determine whether someone is alive. So Torah says someone who doesn't have clothing, someone who is so poor that they don't have clothing or food is considered dead. So they're considered dead. And we learned this actually from the story of Jacob when he's wrestling the angels, And so we need to give people life. So by giving people basic essentials, food, shelter, clothing, that is the number one priority. Subsidizing things like education and social services, shuls, and all those sorts of things is right up there as number two, because those things like Jewish education, shuls, and things like that are part of the infrastructure that help a Jewish community even exist. but it's not the same as feeding the poor. Actually, a head of a shul is a women's mikveh. Of all the institutional obligations, a women's mikveh is number one. If there's no women's mikveh, you sell the shul. You sell a Torah scroll. Do whatever you can to get the money for a women's mikveh. Once there's a women's mikveh, then we move along to education and synagogues and things like that. And then you move down to broader services. So things like the environment and all that come right down the list. So if your choice is save the whales or save people, 100 times out of 100 times, you've got to save people. So yes, you're quite right, Doron, that charity does start relatively at home and it moves out in concentric circles from there. Any other questions? You can just unmute yourself if you want to ask. Okay. I'll just see. Just checking that I didn't get any messages. Okay. Let's move on to the next subject then. And if I can just finalize, reiterate one point, which is that in these times, especially, the need for tzedakah is compounded, because as I started off today's shir, there is far greater need. People are mamish short right now. So there's a greater need to share and give charity. And then on the other side, on the spiritual flip side, the tension of giving charity, and especially 10% of your earnings when there's financial insecurity, is so much greater. And therefore the spiritual accomplishment and the purpose of existing, which is to bring that spirituality into this world, to bring Hashem's rots and Hashem's will, and to reveal Hashem in this world, is far greater, because the darkness of constraint conceals the miracle of reality. And so when we give tzedakah, when we give mace in this time, when it's so hard, that's when you reveal the greatness. It's like, you know, when our children put in immense effort into achieving something, whatever it is that they achieve is like so much greater than when things come naturally and easily to them. Likewise with us, it's $1 million that has been earned. One day I hope to tell you what that feels like, but $1 million that has been earned is going to be far more valuable than $1 million that has been inherited or won in a raffle. Marco, you got a question? No? Okay, cool. I'm just going to remute you. Okay, so the next thing is why we really need a temple in Jerusalem. So this actually is based on the last part of the parasha. In the last part of the parasha, we've got, where is it? Hashem says, I'm going to rest in the place. Where is it? Is it here in the 4th aliyah? That's forbidden foods. I should have made a note of where it is. Sorry. No, I think it's in the 4th aliyah. Hashem, this is very, very interesting. There is no commandment in the Torah, build me a temple in Jerusalem. The Torah says, make for me a mikdash, make for me a sanctuary, make for me a temple. And Hashem says, if you build it, I'll be there. I'm in. So we did that. We built a temple in the desert called the Mishkan. And actually, when we conquered Israel, when we moved into Israel under the guidance of Joshua, successor of Moses, we continued to operate with the Mishkan. The Mishkan moved around until it really settled in Shiloh. Now, if you go to Shiloh, which is in what is called colloquially the West Bank, you can go to Shiloh and you can go to the place where the Mishkan was. It's very clear where it was. There's a lot of archaeological finds that show exactly where the Mishkan was and how it all worked. But it was there. But that wasn't Jerusalem. It's not far from Jerusalem, but it's not Jerusalem. In fact, for pretty much close to 400 years, we operated with a portable temple, the Mishkan. King David is the one that says to Hashem, I would like to build a temple on Har HaBayis, on Temple Mount, on Har Moriah, on Mount Moriah. Can I do that? And Hashem's pretty cool with that, and he actually buys Hara Maria because it's actually in the hands of a private landowner from a different nation who's quite happy to sell it. In fact, he's very happy to sell it. He wants to donate it, and King David says, no, 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 I don't want your donation. I want to buy it. And then he says, okay, fine, you can buy it, but let me at least sponsor all the wood. So King David says, no, I will buy the timber. And he says, well, let me at least sponsor the animals for sacrifice. Like I want a part of this temple. And King David says, I love your enthusiasm, but this thing has got to be paid for. No freebies. And nobody is going to be able to ever say, really, that was built because of my generosity. This temple has got to be built because we, the people, built it, not because we got the opportunity. And so he actually buys the land. He pays for it, even though it's part of the destined Jewish homeland. He still pays for it. He wants no questions about this. And that's very interesting because Abraham did the same thing when he bought Ma'aseh Machpelah at a heavily inflated price to bury Sarah. Adam and Eve already buried there. And he could have said, mate, you're a squatter that took my land. I'm burying my wife here. And he says, no, Ephraim, I'm going to pay for this. And no one is ever going to be able to say that we acquired this illegally. This comes up a number of times in Jewish history that we're very, very particular about buying things just to make the fight go away. And that way, nobody will ever be able to have a claim against us. So it's King David that says to Hashem, I'd like to get this portable temple upgraded to a more permanent thing on Temple Mount. Now, there is biblical reference that you could interpret as maybe this was actually what Hashem meant. But if you look in the surface interpretation of the Torah, it does not say, build me a temple in Jerusalem. However, once God gives the nod and once this process is initiated, no other temple is allowed. In fact, there were other temples, bad ones and worse ones. So let me talk about the worst ones. Within 100 years of King David's death, we've got the splitting of the Jewish empire. We've got Jewish people moving into other cults and religions, and they set up their own bomos, their own temples and altars to all sorts of different gods around the systems, and it's crazy. So they build all these temples, but those are temples to other gods. So that's terrible. But I get it. You know, you want your own temple, you do that. But actually, in Egypt, in Elephantine, which is, I believe, an island in the Nile River, there was a temple, a replica temple of Jerusalem. This is going back a couple thousand years, and it even had its own high priest and priests that administered. Now, this was very naughty, and it was very much against what the prophets said and against what Hashem wanted, but the people that built it felt that it was needed and it was allowed and all that. It didn't end well, but they had built it and they did run it. It was like it's like in different periods of history, Lahavdil, to separate between Judaism and Christianity, there were multiple popes. There were two popes. And one didn't accept the other. Anyway, because there was Rome and there was Avignon, and you had two seats of the head of the Catholic Church. So Lahavdil, we had that with the Beis Mikdash as well. But after King David initiated it, Hashem said, no, this is it. You want to upgrade the mitzvah from portable temple to this? I'm totally on board. And this is part of the destiny. This is a good thing. And no sacrifices can be brought outside of this place from here on end. So in general, sacrifices couldn't be brought outside of the Mishkan. But now they can't be brought. But if the Mishkan moved around, so did the sacrifices. After this, no sacrifice could be brought outside of Temple Mount and out of where the Mizbeach is. So from the Tanakh, from the scriptures, which is part of the canon of Judaism, we discover the importance of the temple. And why this is important is because the obligation to bring sacrifices and the obligation for a temple service has not gone away. The Torah is very clear what has to happen on a daily basis in the temple. The reason why we don't do it right now is because the temple doesn't exist. Not because the obligation doesn't exist, but because the opportunity doesn't exist. So this is like if, God forbid, a man doesn't have any arms, he doesn't put on tefillin. It's not that the obligation to put on tefillin goes away. It's that the opportunity to put on tefillin isn't there. This is a very interesting discussion in the 9th and 10th centuries as to why women don't get circumcised in Judaism. Is it because they don't have what to circumcise? They don't have a foreskin? Or is it that it is a mitzvah that is only given to men? And this is actually debated because it's very, very important halachically, because this has all sorts of ramifications on this very discussion as to whether laws are dependent on what the law relates to, or does what exists exist within the context of a law. And the conclusion is that that the reason why women aren't circumcised is because the obligation is for men, and men have a foreskin. So those are two dual things that come together. So it's not that deep down we actually believe in female circumcision, but we just don't do it. The answer is actually no. It is forbidden for anything of the sort to be done to a woman. So or to a girl, God forbid. So that sort of thinking is important because we have the obligation for the temple, for the service of the temple, but because we don't have a temple, we don't do it. But that means that when the Gemara says, now we understand what the Gemara says, which is anyone who didn't build the temple in their lifetime, it's as if they destroyed the temple in their lifetime. Because it is so important that we have a temple in Jerusalem that if we didn't attempt to build it, then we're part of the problem. So we actually have an obligation. I'm not going to get into the whole discussion as we did a few weeks ago, because it would just be the same discussion. Why doesn't Israel build a temple? Blah, blah, blah. And if only in after the 6-day war, they would have destroyed the mosques on Temple Mount. They had the opportunity. The world wouldn't have said anything. I'm not going to get into that. I don't want to offend anyone that's watching. I also don't want to get into why doesn't the secular state of Israel do things. It's not for me to comment. I live in Australia. I'm not there. If I really believed in it, go over there, vote, buy a serious power drill and go to town. I'm not there. But what I'm saying is that Al Pi Torah, based on Judaism, we need a temple in Jerusalem. We need it because there's a whole majority of the Torah, most of the 613 commandments, a large majority of the 613 commandments rely on there being a temple. So we need the temple in order for us to fulfill our Judaism. Any questions on that? None. Oh, I scared you off because I said I'm not going to discuss anything to do with the political institution of Israel. Okay, so because we are getting overtime, because we meant to finish at 1:15, I just want to get to the third topic. And I actually prepared this in two ways, and I hope you'll forgive me. I prepared for what would happen if I went overtime, and then I prepared what if I had too much time. So the third topic is the festivals. Are they agricultural, spiritual, or historical, or all of the above? And the reason why I raised this is because the last part of the parasha, it starts in the seventh chapter, or seventh reading. So this is the end of the second half of chapter 15 in the book of Devarim. It goes into the laws of Pesach. It goes into the counting of the Omer, the festival of Shavuos, and the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So what's interesting is that Shavuos is at the end of the counting of the Omer. The Omer is the harvest of grain that took place between the beginning of the harvest of grain that took place between Pesach and Shavuos. Pesach is on a particular day, and it relates to the seasons of the year. Shavuos is to do with the harvest, and it's exactly 7 weeks after Pesach, which is determined by the seasons of the year. Sukkot is the end of the harvest, which is why you're out in your booth in the field, because it's the end of the summer period before they go into winter in the northern hemisphere. So you're at the final harvest. So hang on, is Pesach about the exodus from Egypt? Is Shavuos about the giving of the Torah? Or is Pesach a festival of a good spring, and Shavuos is the festival of new fruit? Isn't it spiritual? Like Pesach is about and philosophical, about emerging from being slaves into being free people? Isn't Shavuos about having a constitution? Isn't Rosh Hashanah the day of judgment? Isn't Yom Kippur the day of judgment? Isn't Sukkot about having an intimate relationship with God, not about final harvest? What is it? And the answer is it's actually all of them. If you just say it's agricultural, you're missing something. If you say it's historical, you're missing something. If you say it's spiritual, you're missing something. What we see here is that the spiral of Judaism is this perfectly aligned of where seasons, time, activities of human of humanity, and the spirituality all overlap. There is no such thing as something that is just agricultural but not spiritual. There's no such thing as spirituality that isn't also physical. This world is a composite of spiritual and physical. Physical is a composite of time and space, so object and rate of change, time and space, and therefore time, space, and meaning must collide for this world to actually be of any purpose. If it has no spiritual purpose, if there is no godliness, then it can't exist. There is only the energy of Hashem, so it's got spiritual energy. If it's to be physical, it requires time and space, and therefore time must be sacred and space must be sacred. And therefore the festivals of the year are actually determined by historical events, agricultural realizations, and spiritual contexts and messaging. And that is the very short discussion on the festivals of the year, which means we are approaching Rosh Hashanah, which is not just the beginning of the year. It's not just an important time of our connection with Hashem, but it is also a very, very beautiful time of the year. For us, we're emerging from winter, and in the Northern Hemisphere, they're coming to the end of summer. And that is a particularly beautiful time to start reflecting before the change that lies ahead, before going into isolation of winter, or before emerging to the freedom of summer, depending if you're the Northern or Southern Hemisphere. Any questions before we move on, before we wind up? Well, then in that case, I'm going to wish everyone a really jolly good day. I really appreciate that you came on to learn some Torah with me, because there's nothing great that we could do right now than to bring spirituality into our world. And just remember, my computer runs on Wi-Fi, and I have just used Wi-Fi to connect with you. Wi-Fi has to travel through the air between my computer and the modem. The modem runs through the ground, the wiring runs through the ground. This class has gone into China and America through the servers, wherever Zoom is. So it's probably run through cabling under the ocean or through satellite communication. It has then been beamed to each of your houses. And through this very simple act of learning Torah, through digital means, we have spread the spiritual energy of Torah through all forms of the atmosphere, whether it be the earth, the ocean, or the air, or the rooms that we're all sitting in right now. So a big yashar koach, a big thank you to you for elevating and purifying the world that we live in. See you later, YouTube, and see you later, Spirit Grow